Hitler's crimes can never be justified, and they must never be forgotten. Millions of souls were burned alive, destroyed by the mad ambition of a man the world has rightfully called a demon in human form. But one haunting question still lingers. After death, did he pay the price? Was justice truly served in the realm beyond? The story you're about to hear is the most chilling and at the same time the most satisfying near-death testimony we've ever received. A man died and was granted a terrifying vision. He saw Adolf Hitler burning in the eternal fire. But what he witnessed was more than just punishment for Hitler. It was a divine warning from God to all of humanity. So what exactly was Hitler's punishment? And what lesson was so urgent that God himself appeared to deliver it? Watch until the very end and comment on the name of your city so God's message can reach where you are, and so our entire community can join in praying for you. If this story touches even a part of your soul, please consider supporting this mission by clicking Super Thanks. Whatever you give, God will return to you 100-fold. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it today. Become part of a growing family of 20,000 hearts walking together under the guidance and covering of the Lord. Now, listen closely to his testimony. My name is Martin, and in 1980 my life was changed forever by an experience I still can't forget. Before everything happened, I was a reckless young man, completely lost in a lifestyle of drinking and endless partying. My life felt like an unstoppable carousel, a blur of drunken nights followed by weary mornings, without purpose, without thought of the future. But right in the midst of that chaos, one event brought me to the edge of death and opened the door to a journey that led me to places no one would ever want to see, including terrifying visions of Adolf Hitler being punished in eternal flames. At that time, I had just moved to Tucson, Arizona, a sun-scorched city full of dusty streets and brutally hot days. To me, Tucson was supposed to be a fresh start, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. I found work on a construction site on the outskirts of town. The job was grueling under the searing heat of the desert sun, where the roar of heavy machinery mixed with the crude laughter of the workers. I fit in quickly, became part of the crew, always ready for a cold beer after a shift or a long night at the local bar. That life, to me, felt like freedom, or at least, I thought it did. I still remember waking up in the mornings with a pounding headache, the smell of cigarette smoke clinging to my clothes, and that hollow feeling I kept trying to ignore. I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in heaven or hell. Life, to me, was nothing more than fleeting moments in the present, and I didn't want to think beyond that. But deep down I knew I was running from questions about meaning, about what might lie ahead. And I never expected that the answer would come to me in the most brutal way imaginable. One scorching day at the construction site, a co-worker brought in a jug of water from Mexico. He claimed it was clean, taken straight from his hometown, and offered it to everyone as a friendly gesture. I didn't think twice. I grabbed the bottle and took a big gulp to quench my thirst. The water tasted a little strange, but under the desert sun I couldn't have cared less. That turned out to be the biggest mistake of my life. Just a few hours later, I began to feel sick. My stomach twisted into knots, sweat poured from my body, and uncontrollable shivers racked my limbs. I tried to keep working, thinking a short break would help, but things got worse. Fast. That night, I collapsed onto the small bed in my rundown apartment, my body weakening by the minute. The pain radiated through every inch of me as if something or someone was squeezing my insides. I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink. Every time I tried to stand, I fell, my head spinning violently. I knew I was sick, but I didn't yet know I had contracted cholera, a deadly illness carried by that contaminated water. Within 72 hours, my body had deteriorated completely. Dehydration left my skin cracked and dry, my lips split, and my breath shallow. I lay in that dark, suffocating room, the only light coming from a dim street lamp flickering through the dusty window, and with each passing second, I could feel life slipping away from me. When I opened my eyes again, everything had changed. I was looking down and saw myself lying motionless on the bed. My face was pale, my eyes half closed. But the strangest thing, I wasn't wearing my glasses. I had terrible nearsightedness, and yet now I could see everything in perfect clarity, from the cracks in the ceiling to the worn-out wooden chair in the corner. I floated above my body, weightless, like a ghost hovering in place. There was a strange duality. I felt both completely detached and yet still deeply connected to the shell of who I had been. Then, without warning, I was pulled upward by an invisible force, through the ceiling, through concrete and steel, and into a vast, pitch-black, icy space. This was the beginning, the gateway to hell itself. It was the threshold to where I would come face to face with images no soul should ever have to witness, including Adolf Hitler, engulfed in eternal flame. But before I could reach that place, I had to pass through something even more terrifying, a confrontation with the truth about life, death, and the ultimate justice that governs it all. As I passed through the roof of the building, I caught a fleeting glimpse of the night sky, glittering with stars, and the vast desert stretched endlessly below me. But that moment lasted only an instant. The pulling force grew stronger, sweeping me into a space of utter darkness, profound, endless, and silent. There was no light, no sound, only a suffocating emptiness that surrounded everything. Then a voice spoke, not through my ears, but directly into my consciousness. It flowed into me like a stream, clear and calm, but charged with undeniable authority. It spoke not with emotion, but with a depth that pierced straight through my soul. The voice began to reveal the mysteries of life, the questions I had always run from during my reckless living. Why is there so much suffering in the world? Why does evil exist? Why do people hurt one another? These words didn't feel like a sermon. They were not preachy or abstract. They were alive, living truths that wove themselves into the deepest parts of my soul. Every answer illuminated a shadowed corner of my mind, as if a great tapestry was being slowly unveiled before me, a cosmic order I had never imagined. I stood there in awe, feeling impossibly small, as though I were being shown a reality far greater than anything I had ever believed in. Then I began moving again, faster and faster, being pulled toward a destination I could not see. The darkness around me began to thin. Off in the distance, a faint light appeared. It flickered like a tiny flame suspended in mist. But this wasn't just physical light. It carried warmth, peace, and an overwhelming sense of authority. It wasn't just visible, it was inviting, commanding, and utterly unlike anything I had ever known. That light called to me, and I knew deep within I was being summoned into something far beyond death, into a truth no soul can ignore. As I drew closer to the light, I realized it wasn't just a source of illumination. It was a living presence, a radiant consciousness that seemed fully aware of me. It shone with such intensity that I felt utterly small, like a speck of dust before the sun. And yet, instead of burning me, the light enveloped me in a warmth and peace I can only describe as the embrace of someone deeply familiar, someone I had always known. In that moment I understood. I had died. There was no denial, no illusion left. My soul stood at the edge of a final judgment, a place where every secret, every hidden moment of my life would be laid bare. Yet strangely, I didn't feel afraid. Instead, a profound sense of justice filled me, as if everything that was happening was perfectly aligned with the design of the universe. The journey didn't stop there. Out of the vast dark space, a new vision unfolded. A massive stone, towering like a mountain, hovered in the void, suspended by an unseen force. Its surface was rugged and ancient, cracked and weathered as though it had existed since the dawn of time itself. And on top of that stone was a throne, glowing with brilliant light, radiating beams as blinding as 1,000 suns. Seated upon the throne was a majestic figure, completely cloaked in light. I could not make out his face, the brilliance was too overwhelming, but the light emanating from him was not harsh. It carried unconditional love, deep compassion, and yet, unmistakably, a righteous severity. I could feel it in my soul. No sin, no shadow could escape the gaze of this being. And in that moment, I knew this was Jesus Christ. Then, in my mind, not as a voice, but as a truth etched directly into my soul, a message surged forth. I was compelled to look back on my life, the reckless years, the drunken nights, the countless choices made without a single thought of consequence. And in that clarity I realized something devastating. In the state I was in, self-centered, pleasure-seeking, faithless, I could not enter heaven. Even if I were allowed in, I would only bring my brokenness with me, contaminating its perfection. What I felt then wasn't condemnation, it was gentle but firm rejection, not as punishment, but as protection. For the divine order, for the holiness of that place. I wasn't ready, not because God was cruel, but because heaven was pure, and I was not. Jesus stood before me, clothed in a robe of purest white, so radiant it seemed woven from threads of light itself. Yet it was simple, unadorned, with no trace of grandeur or vanity. Then he extended his hand and drew from within his robe a set of keys, strange glowing keys that shimmered with a gentle brilliance. These were unlike anything I had ever seen, not forged of cold metal, but shaped from a living substance, as if fire itself had crystallized into form. Each key was unique, twisted and carved like ancient symbols, as though they held the power to unlock the deepest secrets of the universe. As he held them, something caught my eye that made my soul ache. The scars on his wrists, deep and unmistakable, the marks where nails had once pierced him during the crucifixion. But they were more than wounds. They told a story of sacrifice, of bones torn and flesh broken, now shining faintly beneath his luminous skin. I couldn't look away, shocked, moved and overwhelmed, as if I were touching something infinitely sacred, a love no human could ever comprehend. Jesus walked forward, each step silent but resonant, echoing into the endless space around us. I followed, or rather I was drawn with him, pulled toward a mysterious structure suspended in the void. It looked like a gate, not made of wood or stone, but of some ethereal substance, a fusion of mist and silver light. The gate stood towering and majestic, its surface etched with flowing patterns that moved like water, alive, shifting, like the boundary between worlds. My soul felt the weight of what was ahead, a burden of finality, as if beyond this point there was no turning back. Jesus chose one key, twisted like a glowing branch, and placed it at the center of the gate. There was no visible lock, yet the moment the key touched it, the entire gate began to tremble. A deep, distant rumble, like thunder echoing across eternity, filled the space. The moving patterns lit up like stars bursting into life, then dissolved, revealing a passage into unfathomable darkness. A thick black curtain descended, dense like velvet, blocking out everything. I could no longer see the gate. I could no longer see his light, but I felt him beside me, like a lone flame in a storm. And then, without warning, I was pulled violently through the threshold, sucked into a whirlwind of terror. The tunnel spun like a cosmic vortex, swallowing my soul whole. Its unseen walls shrieked, rumbling with the fury of 1,000 beasts howling in torment. A stench choked me, the stench of rot, sulfur and despair, a sickening perfume of death itself. High-pitched screeches, tortured wails and grotesque slurping noises erupted all around me, as if millions of souls were being flayed in darkness. A scorching heat enveloped me, Not fire, but a smoldering breath, like being trapped inside the lungs of a monstrous furnace. My soul trembled violently. I couldn't resist. I had no power to escape. I was simply carried, spinning helplessly in the storm, like a torn leaf lost in a hurricane of damnation. Then, suddenly, the whirlwind stopped. I plummeted, free-falling as if hurled from the heavens into a bottomless pit. Through the descent, I saw blackened clouds swirling, flashes of lightning streaking across the gloom. A sharp pain jolted through me as I hit the ground, solid, burning hot like a desert scorched by invisible fire. I stumbled to my feet, disoriented, my mind reeling. Around me stretched a world I could not understand. There was no clear sky, only a blood-hued fog, thick and clinging like liquid shadow. It hung in the air like spilled crimson, blanketing everything. I didn't know where I was, but I knew, deep down, that this was the place where punishment waited. A place where the sins of humanity were paid for in eternal nightmare. And I was standing in the heart of it. The moment I rose from the scorching ground, surrounded by that blood-red haze blanketing this alien world, a growing terror surged within my soul. The red mist began to recede, unveiling a desolate landscape. The earth beneath my feet was dry and cracked, as though it had been scorched for centuries. From deep fissures in the ground glowed faint red light, like the pulsing veins of a dying beast. There were no trees, no sky, only a crimson canopy above, like congealed blood frozen into clouds. I stood in bewilderment, my spirit trembling, trying to understand where I was. Then, from the distance, I heard footsteps, not one, but dozens, hundreds rushing toward me. Before I could react, a crowd emerged, as if they had risen from the ground itself. They touched my shoulder, greeted me with laughter and familiar warmth, like long-lost friends. But as I looked into their faces, my heart clenched. Some of them resembled people I had known in life, an uncle who had died years ago, a high school friend lost in an accident. Others looked eerily like people still alive, co-workers from the construction site, the bartender from my favorite dive. Their smiles were welcoming, but wrong. I looked closer, and a chill shot down my spine. Their eyes were not human. They shimmered with a cold, golden light. Reptilian eyes with narrow, twitching slits for pupils. Their grins were crooked, stretched too wide, like they had been painted on with trembling hands. I staggered back, horrified, as the crowd began to change. They weren't my friends. They weren't anyone I knew. They were monsters, distorted, rotting, like forgotten vegetables left to decay in the dark. Their skin peeled in patches, oozing from open sores. Their fingernails had grown into twisted claws. The stench, a sickening mix of sulfur and rotting flesh, was so overwhelming it nearly suffocated me. Before I could escape, they lunged at me, like starving beasts. Claws raked across my chest, not my physical body but my soul, yet I felt every slash as if I were made of flesh. Others gripped my ankles and pulled me downward, trying to drag me beneath the earth. I thrashed, but they were far too strong. Their hissing and shrieking blended into a symphony of madness that shattered my senses. I felt myself being torn apart, soul from soul, as if my very essence was splitting. Every scratch burned like fire. In my panic, I tried to think of the light of Jesus, but in this place, in this pit of torment, hope seemed extinct. Then, suddenly, as if responding to some unseen command, the creatures stopped. They hissed and retreated, slithering back into the shadows. I was left collapsed on the burning ground, trembling. From the dark crowd, a figure emerged. Nearly 7 feet tall, twisted and monstrous. It was part man, part beast, its skin an oily grey that shimmered like spilled gasoline. Its head was deformed, hairless, and covered in scars like a map of agony. Its arms were grotesquely long, ending in claws that gleamed in the red mist. It didn't speak, but motioned for me to follow. I didn't want to. Everything in me screamed to run. But something, some force I couldn't resist, compelled me forward, as if choice no longer existed in this place. I followed the creature, its footsteps echoing like hammers striking stone, while I moved silently beside it, like a shadow being led into the unknown. As we ventured deeper, I realized that I had just stepped out of a cube, a perfectly square structure, about 3x3 meters, made from a strange material that seemed half translucent and half pitch black, as if it had been forged from a fusion of light and shadow. Surrounding mine were hundreds, thousands of other cubes, stacked upon one another and embedded deep into an enormous wall, forming a twisted labyrinth, like the squares of a massive, warped Rubik's cube. Each cube glowed with a dim, flickering light, not the kind that brings hope, but rather the kind that whispers of torment, like a smoldering ember flickering in eternal darkness. I looked closer into the other cubes, and what I saw made my very soul shudder. Inside each one, souls were trapped, forced to relive parts of their lives, not as memories, but as eternal nightmares, where every sin brought fresh pain, again and again, without end. In one nearby cube I saw a woman, dressed in ornate garments of a temple prostitute, dating back to ancient Corinth, around 69 AD. She stood before a towering idol, its base engulfed in fire. But she wasn't the one conducting the ritual. From the fire beneath the idol, infants began to rise, the very children she had once sacrificed in brutal ceremonies, cast into the flames in the name of false gods. These souls, their eyes glowing and claws razor-sharp, climbed onto her, ripping at her flesh, howling with voices not of children, but of betrayed spirits. She tried to flee, but the cube was far too small. The fire surged, burning her from within, as if every cry, every claw, every lick of flame was the cost of the lives she had destroyed. I felt my stomach twist into knots, even though I had no body to feel it. This wasn't punishment as I had imagined it. This was justice in its rawest, most terrifying form. I had no idea how far I had traveled in this world, nor how long I had been drifting through it, when suddenly a structure appeared before me, as if placed there specifically for me to witness. It was a massive cube, far larger than anything I had seen so far, with walls that shimmered like shattered glass, glowing with a searing white light, like a forge set ablaze by an invisible flame. At the center of this cube stood Adolf Hitler, no longer the powerful dictator the world once feared, but now a soul in bondage, consumed by a white-hot fire so blinding it blurred everything around it. Yet this fire was no ordinary flame. It shimmered like molten diamonds, moved like a living entity, and wrapped around him with merciless precision. His skin did not burn to ash, did not peel away. It remained intact, preserved solely so that he could feel every moment of agony. Each lick of the flame across his body was a precise echo of the suffering inflicted upon millions in the death camps. I didn't just see it, I felt it. A deep spiritual knowing overwhelmed me. Every flame carried the screams, the terror, and the despair of those he had ordered into the furnaces. The fire did not simply consume. It replayed every moment of torment he had caused. I could hear it, not with ears, but deep within my consciousness, the cries of women, children, and men, their pleas ignored, their last breaths suffocated in smoke and fire. Every camp, every chamber, every soul, magnified and returned to him within this eternal blaze. He screamed, a sound not of a man, but of a crushed soul. But his cries were swallowed by the roaring of the flame, a symphony of relentless justice. His body was incinerated, bones reduced to ash in an instant, only to be immediately restored, whole again, ready to endure it all once more. I watched him thrash, arms raised as if to rip the fire away, but the cube was a prison without exit. Its shimmering walls reflected his twisted face, every line etched in rage, despair, and futility. His eyes, ablaze with both fury and hopelessness, stared into the void, still defiant, as if he believed he could resist destiny. But here, there was no mercy, no escape, no pardon. Each moment in the flame was a divine reminder that no atrocity goes unanswered. I could feel the cold justice of the punishment, as if the universe had been designed so that no pain is forgotten, no blood ever ignored. I stood trembling, my soul torn between two emotions. One part of me was shocked by how precise justice could be. Every flame, every scream perfectly measured to match the weight of his crimes. No mistakes, no leniency, only truth, raw and eternal. Yet another part of me recoiled at the sheer brutality of it. The fire never ceased, the pain never paused, and the endless cycle of destruction and rebirth ensured that he would suffer for all eternity. I had once mocked the idea of eternal consequence. I had lived without belief, without reverence, but now, standing before this eternal tribunal, I understood a truth I could never again deny. Every action in life carries eternal weight, and the most horrifying crimes demand the most horrifying punishments. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave, swallowing every thought and every breath of reason. I didn't know where to run, what to do. My soul trembled violently, and in that abyss of despair, a single name erupted from within me. Again and again, like a fragile rope I clung to in the storm, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. I repeated it so fast the syllables blurred together into one desperate, pulsing plea. A thread of hope stretched thin but still holding. Then, from behind me came a sound, not the hiss of demons, but the heavy, thunderous sound of footsteps striking the scorched ground. Each step reverberated like a drumbeat of deliverance, breaking through the suffocating atmosphere. I was too terrified to turn around, fearing some new punishment or a more dreadful creature. But as the footsteps grew closer, something changed. The grotesque creatures around me froze, their hissing silenced by a sudden, bone-deep fear. One by one they recoiled, slinking into the shadows like beasts fleeing the light. From their midst emerged a towering entity cloaked in a swirl of purple, its face spinning like a vortex. That face twisted between haunting beauty and monstrous deformity. But when the footsteps approached, even this abomination lowered its head and disappeared into the gloom, as if banished by a holy force. And then I felt it. A presence more powerful than words, more comforting than any embrace. An unseen strength surrounded me, lifting me off the searing ground with hands that were gentle yet firm. I opened my spiritual eyes, and there he was. A figure clothed in radiant light, brighter than the sun in a midnight sky. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I knew with an unshakable certainty it was Jesus. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence carried more power than all the words in the world, as if every question I'd ever had was already answered in his presence. Without judgment, without anger, he lifted me like a father carrying a lost child home, and we rose into the air, leaving the terrible cube of torment behind. Beneath us I saw it, a bottomless pit, vast and black, devouring all light. Screams erupted from its depths, the howls of millions of trapped souls in eternal agony. But I wasn't afraid. His presence was my shield, my anchor in the chaos, the guiding flame through the abyss. We soared above that pit. The winds of hell tore at me, but they could not touch me. I was safe, utterly safe, in the arms of the one who had come for me. The journey felt endless, yet I began to sense a shift. The darkness gave way to a warm glow, not blinding this time, but gentle, like the first rays of dawn after a long night. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew he was taking me somewhere not of death, but of hope. Still he said nothing, yet in that silence was a message that pierced my soul. You were rescued, not because you were worthy, but because I am merciful. And in that light, I felt the weight of all I had seen begin to lift. My soul, once torn and broken, now feels renewed, cleansed. But I knew this wasn't the end. I had been given a second chance. I would return. I would live differently. I would carry the truth with me, the truth of what I had seen, what I had endured, and most of all, who had saved me. My soul, now touched by divine light, was ready for what lay ahead, whatever it may be. I woke up beneath the blinding white lights of a hospital room, gasping for breath, my body weak and trembling. A nurse leaned over to inject something into my arm, while a doctor gently assured me that I was safe. But from that very moment, something inside me had died, and something else was born. I was no longer an atheist, no longer someone who lived by logic and visible proof, because there is no proof in this world that could explain what I had witnessed. No scientific words could ever describe the presence of God I had encountered. I knew He was real, I knew heaven was real, and I knew, painfully, undeniably, that hell was real too. Not as a metaphor, not as a religious symbol, but as real, living places of divine order and power, so powerful that a soul cannot enter them and return unchanged. This near-death experience shattered me and remade me. I no longer live for myself. I live to share what I saw, to warn those who are drifting away from faith, to awaken hearts lulled into numbness by the routine of daily life. I'm not telling this story to spread fear, but to plant a seed of hope. Because if God could reach down and rescue a soul as lost as mine, He is waiting for you too. I hope that what I've experienced makes you pause, makes you reflect, and maybe, just maybe, opens your heart to a truth you once doubted. But Martin was not the only one. Another witness, from a place thousands of miles away, also entered a near-death state, and what he saw in hell matched perfectly. Adolf Hitler, bound in chains amid the flames, surrounded by souls imprisoned for unforgivable crimes. Listen to this next testimony, and you will realize no one escapes the justice of Almighty God. He once thought his life was over when he was sentenced to 15 years in prison for a fatal mistake. But the real tragedy was only just beginning. After being released, a horrific accident left Michael in a near-death state. He did not see heaven, nor did he hear the voices of angels. Instead, he was dragged down into hell. There he came face to face with someone he could never mistake, Adolf Hitler. The man who once held absolute power was now screaming in agony, tormented beyond imagination. How was Hitler punished for the monstrous crimes he committed? After all the suffering he has endured, does he deserve forgiveness? Listen closely to this haunting testimony. Hello, Eternal Bible Stories channel. My name is Michael Jazz. I had this vision on April 24, 2021, and I feel compelled to share it with your audience. I grew up in a violent neighborhood where fights and stabbings were as common as the rising sun. For most of my life, I was known as a hot-tempered and impulsive man. My father abandoned our family when I was just a child, leaving my mother to work 3 different jobs just to put food on the table. Without a father figure to guide me, I quickly strayed down the wrong path and fell in with the wrong crowd. By the time I was 15, I was already involved in petty theft. By the age of 18, I was fully immersed in gang life. But it wasn't just the thrill of rebellion that pulled me into this world. It was the deep desire to belong, to be part of something bigger than myself. That, combined with the illusion of respect, led me further and further into a life of crime. Under the suffocating atmosphere of a run-down bar on the outskirts of the city, I walked in with the simple intention of having a few drinks before heading home. The pulsating music, the thick haze of cigarette smoke mingling with the overpowering scent of alcohol filled the air. I had set foot in places like this hundreds of times before, but this night would bring about a tragedy that would alter my life forever. As the night wore on, the tension within me swelled like a fire ready to erupt. I wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble found me first. A man named Mark accidentally bumped into me, spilling his drink all over my shirt. A minor incident, a seemingly harmless moment, but to me, at that time, it felt like an unforgivable insult. Harsh words were exchanged, and tempers flared. I don't remember exactly who provoked whom first, only that everything escalated too quickly. Mark shoved me hard, and in a moment of blind fury I lashed out with all the anger that had been simmering inside me for so long. My fist connected directly with his jaw, the sickening sound of bone hitting bone silencing the entire bar. Mark collapsed, his head striking the floor with a dull thud. And then stillness. The next few moments unfolded like a nightmare. I dropped to my knees, shaking his shoulders, my voice stammering with disbelief. "Get up, man. Mark, wake up." But he never opened his eyes again. Regret hit me like ice-cold water dousing my face, but it could not erase the horrifying truth before me. The air in the bar became unbearably heavy. Someone screamed. Someone called the police. Eyes turned toward me, filled with horror, anger, and disgust. I stood frozen amid the chaos, my mind blank, my body trembling as if I had been struck down myself. I hadn't meant to kill him. I never wanted this to happen, but how could I deny it? Mark was dead because of me. The wailing of sirens tore through the night, flashing red and blue lights casting eerie reflections on my sweat-drenched face as I was handcuffed and shoved into the police car. The officer read me my rights, but I barely heard anything beyond the deafening thud of my own heartbeat. For the first time in my life, I no longer felt strong. I was no longer just a petty thief or a street brawler. I was a murderer. The trial moved faster than I had expected. I sat there in silence, watching the grief-stricken faces of Mark's family, his mother's tears carving deep lines of pain across her cheeks as she stared at me as if searching for answers to a loss that could never be undone. My lawyer pleaded with the jury, arguing that this was nothing more than a tragic accident, that I had not intended to take his life. But the prosecution did not allow me the luxury of justification. They painted me as a violent, dangerous man, a threat to society that needed to be locked away. A part of me knew they weren't wrong. My unchecked rage had led me here, and now I would have to pay the price. When the judge struck the gavel and announced 15 years in prison for manslaughter, I heard my mother's anguished sobs from the back of the courtroom. That sound cut through me like a blade straight to the heart. I hadn't just destroyed Mark's life, I had shattered my own family as well. As the officers escorted me out of the courtroom, I turned back for one last glimpse of my mother, her eyes brimming with pain, disappointment, and a deep, consuming fear for her son's future. That was the last image I carried with me as I stepped through the prison gates into a world where cold walls and iron bars would confine me for the next 15 years. The first years in prison were an unending nightmare. Prison was more than just a loss of freedom. It was a slow, agonizing descent into regret. Each day behind bars felt like a life sentence in itself, not because of the walls that confined me, but because of the guilt that consumed me. I avoided trouble, steering clear of the frequent fights that erupted among inmates, but no matter how much I tried to escape conflict, I couldn't outrun my own mind. I wasn't a cold-blooded killer, yet that didn't change the fact that I had taken a life. Every night, lying in my cramped cell, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself the same haunting question. If I had controlled my anger for just a second longer, would my life have turned out differently? Through it all, my mother never abandoned me. She visited me every week, her presence a painful reminder of everything I had lost. She shared stories of the world outside, the changes in our neighborhood, updates on old friends, small joys that should have brought me comfort. But instead of feeling connected to life beyond these bars, I felt even more detached. With every visit, every goodbye, I sank deeper into the isolation of my own existence. I slowly accepted that this was my fate, to spend my youth in a cell, paying the price for a moment of rage that had cost a man his life. Then, when I least expected it, hope arrived. 6 years into my sentence, my lawyer came to see me with news that could change everything. A new witness had come forward, someone who had been at the bar that night and had seen the full story unfold. His name was Tom, and for reasons unknown, he had never spoken out before. But now he was ready to testify. Mark had been the aggressor, repeatedly provoking me, even shoving me before I retaliated. What had once been seen as a violent attack was now being reconsidered as self-defense. The moment my lawyer filed for an appeal, the waiting game began. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I refused to let hope take root, fearing the devastation of another disappointment. But then, the day arrived. Once again I stood in the courtroom, but this time I wasn't just a convicted man awaiting judgment. I had a chance to prove the truth. Tom took the witness stand, his voice steady and firm. He recounted every detail of that night, the way Mark had been aggressive, how he had taunted and shoved me, and how I had only reacted when I felt threatened. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. I saw doubt flicker in the eyes of the jury, contemplation on the judge's face, and for the first time in 6 years, I felt something other than despair. Then, the moment that changed everything. After a long deliberation, the judge overturned my original sentence. My charge was reduced to involuntary manslaughter, and since I had already served more than enough time for that offense, I was to be released immediately. The words hit me like a tidal wave. The weight I had carried for years suddenly felt lighter, though not completely gone. I turned to see my mother, her face wet with tears, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming relief. Stepping out of prison after years of confinement should have been a moment of celebration, but instead I felt like a stranger in a world I once knew. The streets seemed different, the people more distant. I was free, yet I no longer felt like the man who had once walked those streets. The prison doors had opened, but the past still loomed over me like a shadow. I had been legally forgiven, but the real question remained: could I ever forgive myself? Walking out of prison, I felt like a stranger in a world I once knew. The streets were busier, the buildings taller, and the people around me didn't seem to notice I existed. My mother was the only familiar presence, waiting with tears of joy. She pulled me into a silent embrace, her love unwavering despite everything. She had never given up on me, even when the world had. Adjusting to life outside was harder than I imagined. Simple things, using a smartphone, making payments, felt foreign, but the biggest challenge was finding work. No matter where I applied, restaurants, gas stations, construction sites, I was always rejected. The words, "We'll call you," never led to a call. It felt like I was still trapped, just in a different kind of prison. I wondered if I'd ever be truly free. In desperation, I turned to a place I had never considered: the church. In prison, I had read the Bible not out of faith, but to cling to something in the darkness. Now, stepping through those church doors, I expected judgment, but found only open arms. No whispers, no stares, just genuine acceptance. The pastor placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Welcome home." For the first time, I felt like I belonged, not in a gang, not behind bars, but in a place of true peace. Prayer meetings became my refuge. Each sermon, each prayer, filled the emptiness I had carried for years. Slowly I realized God had never abandoned me. Not when I took a life, not when I sat in that prison cell. He had led me here, offering a second chance. My first job after prison was at the church, cleaning, setting up for services, helping where needed. It wasn't much, but it gave me something priceless: purpose. No longer running from my past, I began guiding others who had walked similar paths, sharing my story, listening to theirs. Bit by bit, I changed. I was no longer the reckless, angry man I once was. This time, I had truly found the light, and I wasn't letting go. That morning, I woke up energized, ready to embrace a new day with purpose. Since my release, I had been searching for meaning, and volunteering at the community center felt like a way to give back and atone for my past. The aging building, once a refuge for the homeless, had deteriorated badly, making renovation urgent. My group was tasked with clearing out old furniture and debris to prepare for construction. Despite warnings about the building's instability, we worked eagerly, unaware of the hidden dangers. Around noon, most volunteers stepped outside for a break, but I stayed behind to finish clearing an upstairs room cluttered with abandoned items. I had no idea that this small decision would change my life forever. As I moved damp, rotting boxes, a sharp creak sounded beneath my feet. A chill ran through me. I glanced around, searching for the source, but before I could react, the floor trembled. The worn wooden beams finally gave way. I barely had time to take a breath before everything collapsed. I plunged into empty space, swallowed by a whirlwind of dust and splintered wood. There was nothing to grab, nothing to stop the fall. The impact was instant and brutal. Pain surged through my body like fire. My breath came in shallow gasps before fading altogether. The world around me blurred, voices turning into distant echoes. Darkness crept in. The pain, the weight of my body, everything vanished into an eerie stillness. My heartbeat slowed, each beat fainter than the last, like a door quietly closing. I realized I was hovering at the fragile edge between life and death, but I had no idea that my true journey was only just beginning. An overwhelming emptiness consumed me, as if I were drifting aimlessly in an endless void. No up, no down, no concept of time or space to anchor myself. I could no longer feel the weight of my body or experience any sensation as I once did. There was only absolute silence, a suffocating darkness that felt as though the entire world had ceased to exist. I didn't know where I was, whether I was alive or dead, but deep inside, I knew something was terribly wrong. Then, a crushing weight settled over me, an unbearable heaviness, as if an immense force was pressing down upon my very soul. A searing heat began to spread, not like the warmth of the sun or the flames of an earthly fire, but an agonizing burn from the inside out, seeping into the deepest corners of my being. The air felt like it was being sucked away, leaving me gasping for breath that I could not take. When I finally forced my eyes open, the sight before me froze me in sheer terror. This was no longer the community center, no longer the world I had once known. I was no longer amidst the rubble. I had stepped into another realm, one I never imagined I would ever see. A shiver ran down my spine as the realization struck me with full force. I had fallen into hell. The scene before me was nothing short of horrifying, far beyond any nightmare I had ever experienced. The entire landscape was a wasteland of ashes and unending fire, a hellish expanse that no words could truly capture. The ground beneath my feet was not solid earth, but thick layers of blackened soot, smoldering as if they had once been something entirely consumed by flames. Raging rivers of molten lava slithered through jagged rock formations like colossal serpents, bubbling violently, emitting deep, guttural sounds like the pulsing veins of some monstrous entity. Above me, the sky was no longer an endless blue canopy, but a dense, suffocating abyss, swirling with ominous clouds that pulsed with eerie, red-tinged light, like the watchful, burning eyes of a hidden predator lurking in the shadows. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the horrors unfolding around me. Everywhere I looked, I saw tormented souls enduring punishments beyond human comprehension. Some were imprisoned in iron cages, ablaze with an unrelenting fire, writhing in perpetual agony. Others were suspended mid-air, their wrists shackled by glowing chains that burned like molten metal, stretching their bodies in everlasting torment. Some were submerged in pools of liquid fire, their anguished screams piercing through the thick, oppressive air, yet they could never truly perish. Their cries blended together in a haunting symphony of despair and regret, an echo of eternal suffering that never ceased. Amidst this infernal chaos, I gradually became aware of something peculiar. Though I could feel the suffocating heat, hear every agonized scream with stark clarity, and witness the unimaginable horrors taking place before me, I was untouched. I was not burning. I was not bound. I was not suffering as the others were. I was merely an observer, an unwilling witness to the torment, standing in the midst of hell, yet somehow spared from its wrath. But this did not bring me any relief. Instead, it filled me with an even deeper dread. An unanswered question gnawed at my mind. Why was I here? Why was I not being punished? What was I meant to see? A growing urgency surged within me, a foreboding sense that I had been shown this place for a purpose I had yet to understand. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape this nightmare, but deep down, I knew I couldn't. I was trapped here, forced to witness every atrocity unfolding before my eyes. These horrors were not just figments of a disturbed dream. They were a terrifying reality I had never believed in until now. Hell was real, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The harrowing screams of torment still echoed through the air, but amidst the chaos my eyes fixated on a familiar figure, a face I had only seen in history books, in war documentaries, on propaganda posters that once spread fear and destruction to millions. Adolf Hitler. The infamous dictator, the man who once wielded absolute power, was now writhing in unbearable pain, chained to a massive flaming boulder. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. This was not the Hitler from history, the one with a commanding presence, fiery speeches, and an unshakable aura of authority. No, this was a broken soul, a man who had lost everything, including himself. His face was grotesquely twisted in ceaseless agony, his flesh charred and peeling under the merciless inferno of hell. His once intense, ambitious eyes were now hollow and vacant, filled with a bottomless despair beyond description. Even in the midst of this terrifying landscape, I felt an inexplicable pull of curiosity. I needed to hear what he had to say. As I stepped closer, Hitler slowly lifted his gaze and met my eyes. A shiver ran down my spine. Gone was the look of a man who believed himself invincible. What remained was the gaze of someone who had finally realized the truth, but far too late. Before I could utter a single word, he spoke first. His voice was hoarse, broken, as if centuries of screaming had stripped it down to nothing but raw agony. I thought I was invincible. I believed history would justify my actions, but now I see the truth. I am condemned to this place for the suffering I have caused, for the countless lives I destroyed. The moment he finished speaking, the shadows around him stirred violently. As if awaiting this precise moment, monstrous creatures emerged, their grotesque forms illuminated by the hellfire. Demons. With glowing red eyes and twisted, hideous bodies, they descended upon Hitler with horrifying savagery. Their claws tore into his flesh, their fangs sank deep into his already burned body. He let out an agonized scream, a sound so filled with torment that it rattled through my very soul. The demons howled in sadistic delight as they dragged him down, deeper into the flames. The lava below roared as it surged upward, engulfing his contorted body, sizzling and cracking as the last remnants of his earthly form were consumed by the raging fire. I stood motionless, my mind unable to process what I had just witnessed. But before I could even begin to recover, My eyes caught sight of another soul. This time, it wasn't a dictator. It wasn't a man known for war or genocide. This was someone entirely different. A celebrity, a face recognized across the world, a man who had once graced the screens of millions, admired and adored. I knew his name. I could have spoken it aloud, but something deep within me held me back. It was not my place to reveal him. It was as if I had been restrained by a divine force, as if the decision to name him was beyond my authority. Some may find this difficult to understand, but I knew I could only share what I was meant to share. As I stepped closer, he lifted his head. Tears streamed down his face, his expression one of overwhelming regret and sorrow. I did not need to ask him anything. He spoke on his own, his voice trembling, heavy with remorse. I once stood at the peak of success, fame, fortune, admiration. I had it all, but it was never enough. I always wanted more, and I was willing to pay any price. In a moment of weakness, I made a deal with the devil. I sold my soul for success, believing it would bring me happiness, but it was all a lie. Satan took everything from me, my peace, my joy, even my very soul. And now I am here, trapped in eternal torment, paying the price for my greed and ambition. Paying the price for my greed and ambition. His voice broke, and for a moment he hesitated, but then he uttered a final sentence, one that sent an unbearable chill down my spine. Don't make the same mistake I did. Before I could react, the demons came for him. Just as they had done with Hitler, they lunged from the darkness, grabbing him with merciless strength. Their claws dug deep into his flesh as they dragged him across the scorching ground, their cruel laughter mixing with his desperate scream. He struggled, but there was no escape, no mercy, no second chance. In an instant, he was swallowed by the abyss. The fire rose, and he was gone. I stood there paralyzed, my heart heavy with a terror I had never known. What I had just witnessed was not merely punishment, it was a warning. Hell was not just a place for tyrants like Hitler. It was not reserved only for the most notorious villains of history. It was also the destination of those who had traded their souls for fleeting earthly gains. A single, haunting question echoed in my mind. Did I deserve to be here too? And in that moment, I knew I had to find a way to escape. I felt a force, powerful, unrelenting, yanking me away from the terrifying grasp of hell. The movement was so swift that I barely had time to comprehend what was happening. A surge of light enveloped me, pulling me into a whirlwind of invisible energy, wrenching me away from the screams and the eternal flames. The searing heat, the suffocating despair, and the overwhelming fear slowly faded, replaced by a strange numbness as I was hurled back toward the world I once belonged to. I gasped awake, as if surfacing from the depths of an ocean after nearly drowning. My breath came in ragged, desperate gulps, my chest burning as though it had been crushed under an unbearable weight. The blinding white of hospital lights forced me to squint, and unfamiliar yet concerned faces hovered over me. Doctors and nurses bustled around, checking my vitals, while the steady beep of a heart monitor reassured me that somehow, against all odds, I was alive. I overheard someone say that I had been in a coma for 3 days following the building collapse. By some miracle, I had been pulled back from the brink of death. My physical wounds began to heal, but my mind was far from recovered. I couldn't forget what I had seen. I had heard stories of near-death experiences, of people encountering Jesus, seeing angels, or being embraced by the warm glow of heaven. But my journey had been completely different. Instead of paradise, I had been thrust into hell. Instead of comfort, I had witnessed the absolute absence of hope. Instead of divine peace, I had been shown the horrifying reality of eternal suffering. A haunting question gnawed at my soul. Why hadn't I seen heaven? What did it mean for me? Did it mean I was unworthy of salvation? These questions tormented me in the days that followed, leaving me feeling stranded in an emptiness I couldn't escape. But slowly, clarity began to emerge. My experience in hell was not a punishment, it was a lesson. God had not condemned me, He had warned me. He had given me a glimpse of what awaited those who refused to turn back. The absence of heaven in my journey was not a rejection, but rather a call to action. What I had seen was not a hallucination or a trick of the mind. It was a divine message. A mission had been entrusted to me. I had to change. I had to live righteously, and I had to warn others. I was no longer Michael of the past. My journey through hell had transformed me inside and out. I could not waste this second chance. I had been given an opportunity to redeem myself, to use every moment of my life for good, to choose righteousness over darkness before it was too late. This transformation wasn't just internal, it manifested in action. I returned to church, but this time I wasn't just another silent face in the back pew. I immersed myself in community service, sharing my testimony and reaching out to those lost in the same darkness I had once embraced. I began speaking to young men standing at the same crossroads I had once faced, those who believed power, money, and status would fulfill them, but were blindly walking toward destruction. I started holding meetings, sharing my terrifying experience, not to scare people, but to open their eyes to the spiritual reality they ignored. I recounted my journey at church gatherings, community events, and even on media platforms. I no longer feared judgment or skepticism. I knew this was my calling, to warn the world that hell is real, sin has consequences, and only Jesus can save us from that fate. But I didn't want my transformation to be just words. I wanted it to be action. I joined charities, helping the homeless, reaching out to those abandoned by society. I felt compelled to support former prisoners, guiding them back into society, encouraging them to find meaning beyond crime and despair. I no longer sought respect through violence or fear. I sought it through acts of true value. This change was not instant. It was a long, ongoing journey. But I knew I was not alone. God had given me a second chance, and I refused to waste it. I had once been lost. I had stood at the edge of eternal destruction, but now I knew the truth. Life is a precious gift, and every moment is an opportunity to change. If you are reading this, if you feel an emptiness inside that nothing seems to fill, if you are on a path that you don't know how to turn back from, know this: it is not too late. You can change and you can start again. All you need to do is turn back to God.